Now, so we're calling this event plant pressing, but make it science. So we are combining like just fun plant pressing plus also the scientific form of herbarium and making this into data for science that we can use for collecting data about the plants around us. And yeah, and Rhay here, our president of ERA, is like a professional herbarium technician, like employed by the National Park Service. So you could actually make a career out of pressing plants if you like it. Yeah, it's professional. You're getting paid.
Say though, because this could get me in trouble. I'm not employed by the National Park Service.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
by the Santa Monica Mountains Fund, which is a partner of the National Park Service. I am. I would just like to say I am not impersonating a Park Service employee. Also, Tech is also here. He wasn't here, remember, just graduated, but he is my coworker, and he worked in the herbarium at UCLA longer than I did. He's going to be co-hosting tonight. Um, and I'm just going to go ahead and get started and share my screen because we have a short presentation that we want to do first. Shoots. Get started. Okay, I'm like all over the place because I have multiple monitor computers going right now. So here we go. We're going to talk about the art and science of pressing plants. So before we do anything, how do I make this full screen? Sorry. You know what? We're just going to deal with it. Sorry. Before we start anything, we're going to do a land acknowledgement because UCLA exists on land that was stolen from the Tongva, Chumash, and Kizh nations. The land is unceded, obviously. And this is kind of important because, you know, we literally exist on stolen lands. The plants that we love and want to learn about, they exist on stolen lands. And there are a lot of aspects of herbarium work that are actually grounded in Western colonial, you know, artifacts of this land that was stolen from the indigenous tribes. And I also want to acknowledge that indigenous nations, specifically the Tongva, Chumash, and Kizh nations here in, you know, Los Angeles and Ventura County, they have their own unique and they have their own unique relationship that with the flora of our local area that we really haven't been able to replicate, and we shouldn't because it's just culture that's been, you know, lost because of genocide. So we're just going to acknowledge that. And this is a picture of a website called Native-Land California. You can type in your address and see whose land you exist on. And we're just going to move on. And so today we're going to start by talking about what exactly herbaria are. We're going to discuss a little bit about what herbarium specimens get used for, and then we're going to spend the majority of our events actually putting together an herbarium specimen. That should be the fun part. And this is a video of Tack clipping a specimen at work. This is California fuchsia, and then right next to it is the fuchsia after being pressed and dissected. So I thought that was cool. And we're going to next just introduce ourselves so you can hopefully trust our credibility. We're not just making anything up. We have some experience where we really took a lot of time to learn about this kind of work. So I'm a senior. I'm ERA's president, like Laurel mentioned. I volunteered at the herbarium at UCLA for a little while, and then I got a work study job to actually get paid for my time there, which is awesome. I've done a little bit of research with plants. I interned for the NPS, partnering with the Santa Monica Mountains Fund at their nursery. Learned a lot about plants, and then I got hired on to be a field lead for population scouting and run their herbarium. I'll let Tack take it away now.
Hello, everyone. My name's Takuma, but you could call me Tack. Yeah, I just graduated. Yeah, I worked at the UCLA herbarium for about a year and a half until COVID kicked us out. And then I also was part of a digitization project with Katie Pearson, who leads the CAP-TCN digitization effort. And yeah, like Rhay, I started at Santa Monica Mountains as an intern, and then we did a lot of herbarium work for them, and then ended up getting hired on to do the same work that she's doing. So we're just taking interns out to the field and trying to find populations of plant species.
Okay. So now we can really get started, and I'm first going to talk about really what happens in an herbarium. So first off, what is an herbarium? Before I got to college, I had never even heard that word before in my life. What is an herbarium specimen? So there's a picture of a specimen on the left, and that is, I believe it's like Opuntia calvinensis. We have some pictures showing us how old herbarium specimens can be. We have pictures of, what the inside of a specimen cabinet looks like. And, to as simply as possible answer our question of what is an herbarium, you can picture a library, but instead of a collection of books, we have collections of plants. They are dried specimens. I didn't really know that. When I saw herbarium, I was like, oh, cool, we're going to work with plants, but they're dead at this point, but they're still cool. So yeah, an herbarium is as a library is to a book, an herbarium is to an herbarium specimen. And, there's a lot going on this slide, but before I get into the, nitty gritty details about everything that's happening here, I want to hear what everyone notices first. Like what stands out to everyone that's watching right now.
I would say like the text that accompanies each of the plants, sort of like describing
anything. There's nothing you could say that would be wrong. I can start. I think something I notice is that the specimen is pretty. I think it's pretty.
They are all dried out. And I think Emily said something about the text. I don't know if you guys caught that. Yeah. That the text is all the same, or it shows like the source of where.
Sorry, I was like just walking around my house, so my mic might not have been connected. But the text like described like that there's text accompanying each of the samples.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Emily. That's my bad. I really thought we were sitting in silence. Okay, let's keep going, and I won't cut anyone off this time, I promise.
Something I wanted to add was the first day I came to work, I thought all these plants were alive, but then I go to like the bottom floor of the botany building and there's no windows, and it's I was like, what is this place, So that's one thing I noticed.
Tatum said that there's still color in the flowers on the left, and that's true. That's a really good observation because color doesn't always stay in these specimens. In the bottom right, it says that the oldest herbarium in existence is a collection from like 1532. And it's kind of, there's a debate going on about what the oldest herbarium specimen is, but this is what they think it is right now. So yeah, imagine a specimen that's over 400 years old from 1532. I think that's kind of insane. So I don't know, maybe specimens that old can keep their color. Sometimes they don't. It's kind of different. Specimens are pretty finicky. What else? Is there anything else, or should we move on to the next slide?
I'm just wondering what it smells like in there. I don't know why, but that's something that came to mind.
Old paper, dust, a lot of dust. I came up with this term called I don't know if I came up with it, but I just thought it in my head, herb dust. So there's just a layer of dust over everything in the herbarium because everything's old. We don't really touch everything all the time because they're there to, the specimens are there to be archived. One day I got herb dust in my eye and my contact lens literally fell out. So it smells like old paper and dust. It doesn't smell bad though. It's pretty cool. Hopefully you get to visit the herb at some point. Is there anything else? Okay, good chat. Let's talk about the details. In summary, there's color still in the specimens. The specimen has text accompanying it. The specimens are pretty, but also let's talk about just the details of what we see happening. So Emily was really astute, and she noticed that the specimen has text accompanying it, as they all should, because a specimen without its data is really hard to use scientifically. It might even be impossible to use scientifically. And I mean, specimens, when they exist in an herbaria, they could be one of like thousands of specimens. I believe at UCLA, there's like around 200,000 specimens. So picture what we see on the left, the cactus specimen, multiply that by 200,000. That's a lot of information. That's a lot of plants. And we could also compare this to apps like iNaturalist and Seek, because those apps, they host very similar information, but you know, in terms of like having physical specimens, they got nothing on herbaria. Like herbaria are where it's at, really. Pictures will only get you so far. It's really amazing that we still have all of these preserved physical specimens, and that's something that I think is really special about herbaria. And you know, there's actually a lot of progress being made in digitizing specimens. That's why we have this picture of the specimen on the left in the first place. And when a specimen gets digitized, its data also becomes available in the form of a spreadsheet. So now we have all of this data from so many herbaria. It's just like a huge wealth of knowledge. There's data that can be analyzed. There's species that can be studied. It's really powerful. So yeah, that's just a little bit about herbaria. But let's discuss, what other reasons can you think of why herbaria and their specimens might be important? Tatum said preserving a record of species. Yeah, that's really important. Preserving species that may be going extinct, from Yasmin. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure UCLA Herbarium has some specimens that are already extinct, which is kind of insane to think about. Looking at changes in plant distribution, oh yeah, that's a huge thing. The CAP-TCN project that Tak mentioned earlier, it's looking at something similar, not necessarily like distribution, but we're looking at changes in phenology. So like climate change is real, you know, weather patterns are changing, they're becoming a little bit more unpredictable. And since we have data from literally 500 years ago, even, we can see like, okay, maybe 200 years ago, this species was flowering according to all the herbarium data. We can compare it to when it's flowering now. Ability to identify plants accurately from Tatum. Yeah, exactly. So a botanist may be able to say like, hey, I saw this plant here, but, and they have their data and everything. But without a physical specimen, you can only be so certain about that observation. You know, like the physical record is the most important thing to tie to that observation, because you can verify what it actually is, right? These are all really awesome ideas that we're going to touch on. Is there anything else? I'll just let us sit and marinate on this for maybe like a minute.
One thing that herbaria does that we're using at the Santa Monica Mountains is we want a physical, so we're collecting seed usually in the summer, and we want something to be able to tie a physical copy to. So we'll take an herbarium specimen now when it's flowering, and then over when the plant seeds in the summer, we'll have something physical. So like there's been, our manager, Antonio Sanchez, has mentioned there's been times where they collect seed and then it grows up into not the correct plant. And then we could tie it back to, we could try to tie it back to the herbarium specimen and be like, was this the right plant, or did we pick the wrong plant, or what happened there? So that's like another application that herbaria is used for.
Okay, cool. We'll go to the next slide then. And these are just some reasons that I came up with. A lot of these reasons you all have already mentioned right now. But we'll start with the stuff going on the left. So that's just a video showing, like, I Googled herbarium specimen on Google Scholar, and you can already see there's just pages and pages and pages of scientific articles using herbarium specimens in their research. So like we talked about before, herbarium specimens are physical representations of a plant. You can extract DNA from that. You can use that tissue. I can't understate how powerful it is, really. So like Tak mentioned, we use herbarium specimens at the Santa Monica Mountains just to inform our restoration efforts. So if something does ever go wrong with our seed collections, we have the herbarium specimen and we can see what really is happening. Herbarium specimen data, it's used for restoration ecology, it's used for conservation biology. It's just really awesome, just the wealth of knowledge that these specimens provide to us. And beyond that, on the right side, we just see that herbarium specimens are really beautiful. Like I just Googled on Instagram, or I searched up on Instagram, #herbarium, to see what other people are doing. And people are using them in like the most creative ways because, you know, plants are just, they're inherently beautiful and they inherently like deserve to exist. So, you know, collecting a plant and then being very intentional about how you want to press it, how you want to mount it, it inspires peace, I think. And you can still learn so much about plants from having preserved specimen just beyond the realm of science. So yeah, Emily says she has a necklace with a pressed fern in it. I love seeing jewelry with like pressed plants in it. I think it's just so beautiful. So yeah, we can appreciate herbarium specimens or pressed plants for more than just their scientific applications. So this is the third part of our herbarium night together. We're gonna start making our own. And I know we're probably like a little bit eager to get going, but we're gonna provide you all with some instructions and context before we do that. So I think Tak will take it away.
Okay. So at the top, that's kind of our workflow that we use at the Santa Monica Mountains. So if you all have collected your own specimen, then we're probably going to be at the begin processing and the label creation part. But those steps before is just collecting them out in the field, and then the quality assurance just means like you just want to make sure it presses correctly, because that's kind of your only chance. Once it dries out, it becomes really brittle and will just break off if you try to move it too much. So yeah, so on the right, that's just a herbarium protocol that Rhay and I wrote while at SAMO. It's really long. It's really has a lot of steps to it. We won't be going through that tonight just because it would just take a long time and it's not as fun as just like, there's just too many steps. It's not fun, but yeah, and then the specimen below is California poppy. And then that's just me mounting it. And then I'm just making sure that the stems are kind of separate and they don't overlap with each other. And then next slide, please. So labeling, so like Rhay mentioned, it's really important. Without a label, like I'd say the label is just as important as the physical specimen. Without a label, it doesn't really have many scientific applications. There's been times at SAMO or UCLA where we have no label or anything to go off and we just have the plant, and it's like, well, that's kind of just let's just put that to the side. It doesn't really have a use for us right now. So yeah, anyway, so on the left of the slide, the handwritten labels. So back in the day, they used to have these handwritten labels just because they didn't have computers. So they would just type out templates onto their typewriter and then they would just fill it in by hand. So tonight, just for convenience, we're gonna do handwritten labels, but if you want to, you could type them out on your own or while we're doing this activity and then mount that. So in the type labels, that template came from a previous botanist at SAMO, Tarja Sagar, and she had this template, and then we just follow it just because, you know, she knows what she's doing. And then below is just the filled out template. So that's the red flowered plant that I collected earlier in the presentation. It's the Epilobium canum. And so it just has a lot of interesting information about what the plant was and what kind of habitat it was growing in. That I'll go into on the next slide. So a lot of this information that we fill in into a label is data that we collect out in the field. So we're basically just inputting the data into kind of a more clean format, something that's easy to read. And so in section A, it's like the title of the collection. So if it's a native plant from California, you would just say like plants of California. If you collected it in your garden, you would say like cultivated plants of California, and so on. Institution is more of like if that specimen is going to go into like a professional institution, like you would say like UCLA Herbarium, Santa Monica Mountains Herbarium, stuff like that. Yeah, so section B is just the genus, species, scientific name of your specimen. You just want to make sure that it's the most up-to-date name because these names change all the time. So a good resource is Jepson E. Flora. That one usually keeps its names up to date. And then the describer, it's the authorship. Yeah.
The describer of a specific species, it's kind of, in my opinion, I think it's a problematic concept because it kind of glosses over the indigenous knowledge that existed about all of these plants prior to, their cultural genocide and colonization. So, the describer is defined as the person who first described the species and gave it an official scientific name. But we should just keep in mind that, these plants existed and had really complex relationships with the indigenous people who owned the land first. Or not owned the land, you don't own the land, but who lived there first.
Right. So following that is the TSN, the taxonomic serial number. Is just a number that ties a number to your species and variety. For tonight, we don't have to worry about it too much, but if you want to, the website is in the protocol. It's itis.gov. Right. And then next is the family. So the way herbarium or herbaria are organized are by family and then genus species. So we include that just to be more thorough about what family our species is in. And again, those even change. So it's good to make sure that that's the most up-to-date name. In section C, it's just kind of more geographic location now. So you would want to, if you want to say where you collected it up to county, hopefully, or city, if you could do that. And because this is a SAMO or a Santa Monica Mountains template, we have landowner because the Santa Monica Mountains are owned by a bunch of different organizations. So NPS, state parks, stuff like that. So that's where you put that. And then general area name, because SAMO is so big, we often split it up into different parks. And so that's where you just put that, maybe like, Zuma, if you know where Zuma is, that's a general area name. And then the locality is kind of like, it's kind of a roadmap to tell someone who's never been there how to get to the area that you collected your specimen. So like those handwritten labels in the previous slide, those were all locality because they didn't have GPSs back in the day. So the only way they would tell someone where that plant was is by the locality. And hopefully they're descriptive enough. Often they're not, but hopefully they're descriptive enough to, to give you a good enough idea. And then lat long, that's just off your GPS. And then that's the datum. Just want to make sure that you know what that is if you're using GPS coordinate system, and then elevation if you have it. And then life cycle, that's just like very simply, shrub, subshrub, like what kind of plant it is, like annual, perennial. And then following that, you would just want to say like if the specimen is flowering or not. And then if it is flowering, describe the flowers because Rhay mentioned that the flowers fade. And also when you press the plant, the shape gets distorted. So now you want to record the shape if you can. And then a lot of labels don't mention this, but we do because we're doing a lot of population work at SAMO. So we record like how big the population is and what the distribution of it is. And then lastly, rarity is just if it's common or rare. And if it is rare, how rare is it? And that's a resource from CNPS. And then section F is just like where the plant is growing. And so you would just want to describe in the habitat notes, like what kind of plant community it is, what kind of, if it's, oak woodland, riparian, coastal sage, chaparral, stuff like that. And then soil type. So like most of this information in part F would be from stuff that you collected out in the field. Like you would just record that data while you're there. So it's a lot easier. You don't have to do it off the top of your head. And then associated species is just what plants are growing around there. And that really helps give like an idea and a picture of what plants grew around there for like community reconstruction uses or anything like that. And then lastly, collector number or collector, and then it's just who collected it. CN is collector number, so that's just someone that is associated. So a lot of the time they'll take notes and then that way they could tie their notes back to the specimen, and then if you ever need to refer to that, and then of course the date.
Okay, so that was just like a lot of information. We ran through it really quickly. So you could refer to the protocol if you want to read a little bit more about it, but it's probably just, I think the best way to learn is to do one or to watch someone making one. So I'm gonna go through, like the label for what I collected for this event. And I'm just gonna, write it down on my tablet. So labels, they get typed up and printed out just because we have that technology now. If you want to handwrite it, just for convenience, for your specimen, so that you can handwrite it, cut it out, glue it by the end of the day, or glue it while we're doing our event, that would be good. So we're going to, new share, let's do OneNote. Okay, so my specimen is sitting right next to me. I got something. I don't have a garden or any houseplants, so I clipped this from like a median that was like out, like right in front of an apartment next door. So that's what I have. And first, I'm going to fill out part A. So the title of my collection is Cultivated Plants of California. This was not growing in the wild. For the institution and region portion of part A, I'm going to leave it blank because this specimen, I'm going to keep it. It's for me. I'm not going to give it to any herbaria, so that's not at all important. Also, since this label is just for me, I'm not going to be filling out as formally as a label that you would see like in an actual like academic institution. So we'll move on to part B. So what was the name of my species? It was, I think, Lantana montevidensis. I think that sounds right. TSN, describer, I'm going to opt not to include those because, again, this is my personal specimen. I'm really just putting here whatever I want, whatever I think is going to look nice on a label. So I'm going to skip describer and TSN. The family is Verbinaceae. I looked that up earlier. I didn't just know it off the top of my head. And if you want to look it up, we use Jepson eFlora online. So then I'm going to do part C, which is just like Talk said, it's about the area you were in. So I don't have the exact latitude and longitude, so I don't have very many decimal points in mind, but that's okay. And since I was using an iPhone, I'm pretty sure the datum was NAD 83. Then the elevation that my phone spit out to me was 2736 feet. So that was part D. Oh shoot, I totally skipped part C. It's okay, we can move it. So USA, California, and then county. So I did collect this in the USA, and I was in California in Los Angeles County. In the template, it's like landowner, general area name, locality. That doesn't apply to me because I collected this outside my apartment. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. I think that's fine. I don't know. Okay, yeah, that's the pen I was using. Now we're going on to part E, and this is where we describe the plant individual and the population. Mine was a small shrub, so I'll write that down, shrub. The specimen was flowering. And for all of your specimens, you can put like specimen flowering or specimen budding or whatever reflects what was happening at the time. And like Tak said, we want to describe the flowers. So specimen flowering with inflorescence. That's the collection of all the flowers, I think. And the corolla is just like the term for it's like the collective term for all of the petals. So you could think of it as like petals. It means the same thing. Corolla magenta. Corolla is just the botanical term. And now I'll talk about the population. Population of about 35 cultivated individuals. And hopefully for all of your labels, if you're following along and making one right now, they look a little bit prettier because it's what's actually going to be glued to your specimen. In part F is where we talk about like the habitat notes, the soil type, things like that. So I'm just going to reiterate, this was a cultivated plant. I don't know anything about like the soil that it was growing in, just because it was kind of like a land cover thing. There was so many individuals of this plant that I couldn't see the soil. So instead of just saying like, I don't know what the soil, I'm just gonna omit the soil completely and not mention it. And that's okay. Plant individual growing in, we'll say it was full sun because it wasn't really under a tree or anything. So some options here for the exposure is full sun or partial shade, or just shade, really like anywhere in that gradient. And for the slope that it was on a flat slope. And it was right next to a sprinkler. So I'm just gonna say likely receiving regular watering. And hopefully by now, after hearing Tak talk about the label and seeing me do an example, you can kind of understand like what we're looking for in each section of a label. So I'm really just, I'm putting together the context of this plant individual's life. And so for the last part of this section, I'm just gonna talk about associate species. Associate species include, there was a western sycamore right next to it, so I'll put the scientific name for that. Botanist racemosa. There was invasive tobacco tree, so we'll put the scientific name for that. And there were some cultivated mallow plants. I don't know the species, so we're just gonna put Malva sp. Yeah, I'm not gonna add any more for that section just because I don't feel compelled to right now. So we're gonna do part G, R. Flores. I think this is like my 30th specimen. And the date that I collected it was the other day. Yeah, it was the day before my sister's birthday, 2021. So that's an example of how you do a label. This is obviously not how I would do it at work. I would type it up, I would make it look professional, but this is gonna suffice for me because this is my collection. It doesn't belong to my work. Out of curiosity, is anyone doing a label right now on pen and paper that they want to show everyone?
I'm working on a specimen or a card for my lupin. This is my card so far. I don't know if you guys can see it. Yeah, working on my handwriting. That's my skill for today.
So I just saw your message in the chat, Adam. Also, I'm having like an irrational fear that my computer is still muted, and anytime I say something, I'm going to talk over someone. But okay, so Adam gave me a thumbs up. He says he has no clue what species he has, which is okay. That happens to me so often. But there are plenty of resources that will help you figure out what species. For example, people always talk about iNaturalist. It's where you just like upload pictures and they'll give you suggestions. But an app that people don't talk about as often that I prefer to use is called Seek. It's made by the same developers as iNaturalist, but it's different because instead of having to upload different pictures, you can point your camera at it, and while you're still looking at it with your camera, it will give you suggestions. So if I were to point my camera at myself, it would say, okay, genus, Homo, species, sapien. It would just guess what's happening. So in this app, yeah, it also works offline, thanks Tack. So I always have my phone with me out of necessity. So when I'm in the field, I can still use it to help me figure out what I'm looking at, because it takes a long time to learn every single species that's around you, and like no one is capable of knowing every single plant in the world. So we all need resources. Seek is one that I like a lot. So I think, let me see. I think making a label was probably the most complicated part of tonight's herbarium session. So if you're still working on yours, that's okay. We have until like 8:30 for this event, but we're gonna move on to Tack's instructions on just like actually some advice about mounting, because mounting is pretty basic. It's just like gluing onto a sheet in the way that you want it to look. But Tack's gonna give you all some good pointers on that. So I'm gonna move my screen back to the Google slide. And I'll let Tack take it away.
All right. So mounting, it's really kind of the art side of it. It's a lot of fun. You could just kind of put it the way you want. When we were interns, there was a coworker of ours that tried to make an art piece out of it using like buckwheat as like clouds, which I think is pretty cool. But for the materials, like for really archival quality stuff that we see at like the UCLA herbarium, we have all these materials that we need, but we don't really need that for what we're doing today. For today, we could just mount it straight onto hopefully a sturdy piece of paper. Right, and then the thing with using this archival quality, which Rhay might have mentioned, it's really expensive. So it's okay that we don't have it, because like unless you're an herbarium, like that's crazy to have on your own, but yeah, kind of the procedures of mounting is kind of you lay it out, think about how you want to do it before you put glue on, and then
also, we are going to give you all like a demo. Like I have my specimen and I'm going to show you like how to do it, but we're just going to give you a list of the materials. We have a few more slides, and then we'll all just be chilling and mounting our specimens. Sorry to cut in Tack.
Yeah. So I just lost my train of thought.
That's okay. We can move on to the next slide. I mean, this slide, it's really self-explanatory. It's just a list of things that you would need.
I have a question. How does Okay, what if you were to like mount it on printer paper versus like cardboard? Like, could you mount it on like anything really? Like other.
I can answer this. So for tonight, I'm gonna be mounting mine on cardboard just because I have it and I think it looks nice.
Mhm.
But at professional herbarium, we have these things called herbarium sheets, and herbarium sheets are a standard size. So every institution across the board, they're going to be using the same size sheet. And this is nice because now when someone is shopping around for herbarium cabinets, everything is the same size. It's standardized, it's professional, it's good. But also, herbarium sheets, they're really thick and sturdy. So, like a piece of computer paper, when you hold it up, it's just going to be like flimsy and flop around.
Right.
If you have your specimen, your dry, brittled, 500-year-old specimen on that, as soon as the paper flops, it'll just fall apart. So herbarium sheets are sturdy. That doesn't happen. And they're also sometimes, I think it's like acid free or something. Or they're archival quality, so they don't disintegrate as time goes on. But if you want to be creative, using computer paper probably won't be a bad idea if you're just gonna, let it sit in the desk. If you want to like frame it or something or pin it onto your wall, maybe use something a little bit sturdier. It's really up to you, your own personal preference if you're just gonna keep the specimen for yourself.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
And this last slide is just a lot of resources that I wanted to share with everyone. Yeah, so that's mine and Tack's email if you have questions about herbaria. If you were curious about anything that we shared with you, if you were interested in like SAMO or the herb at UCLA or ERA or literally anything, you could just shoot us an email. We're also both in the Slack. You can DM us. I put the link to the protocols in here again and some additional interesting things if you want to continue learning about herbaria. I watched this YouTube video by Hannah King, and she did an amazing job really just describing herbaria. She's an actual biologist, so she talks about herbaria from much more experience than me and Tack have, so that's an additional resource for everyone. At my work, I made videos about how to collect a specimen and how to mount a specimen, so you could also look into those. And I also put a link to the California Consortium of Herbaria because that's a website that houses data from, most big herbaria across the state. So you can look at pictures there, you can access data there. And that's pretty much it for the presentation part. Yeah, so now we can spend the rest of our time really just mounting specimens together. And me and Tack, we learned from Dr. Tom Huggins at UCLA Herbarium. So we just wanted to give him a little shout out at the end of our slides. And then we're also learning a lot from Antonio Sanchez, and he's giving us a lot of opportunity to continue to learn about herbaria at the St. Rocky Mountains Fund. So that's it for our presentation. And now we can just, relax, enjoy some creativity, mount some specimens together.
Last thing, I just want to add that if you guys are interested in, being a part of either one of these, I know, or when Rhay and I worked there, we both were work study. I'm not sure if they're still doing that, but I'm guessing once campus opens back up, they're gonna either want more volunteers or more work study people. So if you're interested, reach out there, keep an eye out on the job board, and then this Santa Monica Mountains is usually hiring interns on a rolling basis. So just keep an eye out for that if you're interested. Unfortunately, it is unpaid, which really sucks. But right, yeah, those are just more opportunities to look out for.
My recommendation is if you do want to intern for SAMO, but you're having trouble with the idea of being unpaid, you should do it while you're still a student so you still have your financial aid. If I had waited after I graduated, I wouldn't probably have been able to do an unpaid internship for as long as I did. That's just an aside though. Yeah, I kind of have a crazy setup going. I have one laptop so I could look at all of you, and then I have another laptop where I'm kind of just pointing my camera at my specimen. So I'll just be gluing my specimen down, I guess. I mean, you can see like this is not a professional academic quality herbarium specimen. I'm using a piece of cardboard that I had that has paint on it because I think it's pretty. And let me just grab my supplies. Now would be the time to follow along if you feel like mounting yours as well. I didn't even have like normal glue to use. I had wood glue, so I just diluted it with water. You can see that right there. And I'm just going to be using a paintbrush to brush my glue to the back of my specimen. And then I'm just going to hold it down there. Also, since I did my label online so everyone could see it more clearly, I don't have anything to glue to my specimen. But if you do, you would want to glue it in the bottom right. That's the normal convention for herbarium specimens. So, I mean, I think we could all just sit here and mount our specimens. Maybe